Hi everyone, and welcome to our Sunday night live feed. I started a bit earlier today because daylight savings meant that actually now is, in the old time, is 7 o'clock. So here in South Australia, I decided that I'd just start a wee bit earlier though. So welcome to those that have already joined us, and enjoy and participate in this particular conversation, which is around how we deal and how we manage as we're working through the child protection system if you're a parent who's had your child removed from you. Now, I've talked about this subject on many occasions, but because of the Wednesday night group that we hold, it became evident that this discussion needs to be had again. So I want to make a few pertinent points, I guess, around this particular subject and how it is that you can manage a system which is fraught with danger, which in many aspects is something that you're not familiar with if you first encounter the child protection system, and there is no one out there who can guide you through the system. So if you wish to have a discussion with me, please do so. I'll try. Facebook have got this new thing happening, so I'm not too sure how this will necessarily work, but if you wish to add a comment, I'm sure I will be able to hopefully respond at some point. So the first thing I think I need to say to people is that if your child has been removed by the department, it doesn't mean it's the end of the story. It is actually just the beginning. There are many opportunities that are available to any parent who's had a child removed to have that child returned to them. It is a myth that the department take children and then do not return them. The problem with that is that they just don't return enough of them. I've worked with many parents who have worked through their issues, who have built a reasonable relationship with the department and have had their children subsequently returned to them. I know there's many of you parents out there, though, who haven't had that same experience. And I guess what we need to address is, why does this happen? Why is it when parents work as hard as they can to have a child returned to them that it just doesn't happen to them? Now, there are a number of reasons for that. The primary reason is in relation to the type of relationship that parents create when they first have a child removed. And we need to go through that a little bit, and we need to talk about the trauma that is created by having a child removed from you. I was actually going to initially have a discussion with you around parents' trauma, and it's a worthwhile discussion having, because I don't think it's a subject which is talked about enough, even though some months ago I did do a live feed on that very topic. But what happens is that the emotion that's associated with having a child removed is so intense, so striking, so devastating, that a parent within that emotional turmoil is unable to work out how it is that they should be responding. They're responding in the most natural way that they can, because they're really responding by the devastation that appears when a child is taken from them, regardless of the circumstances. Forget about that for a moment. Just think about the trauma that's created when a child is taken. And that emotion, for many people, particularly men, I think, creates an angry response. Now, the people working in the child protection systems generally do not understand what your experience is when you have a child removed. Their version of you is that you are a lousy parent. Now, we need to understand that if that is their version, how is it that we can correct it? Now, yelling, screaming, calling them names, threatening to kill them, or doing whatever it is that some people do is pretty unhelpful generally, and will create an environment whereby their response to you, their attitudes towards you, will not be helpful. It will just validate their existing attitude. So what I suggest that you do, thanks Chloe for responding. I can now see the messages, thank God. So So I guess what we need to think about firstly is to have some space. When a child is removed from you, you need some space to work it out. You need some space to think about what this actually means to you, and you need to have conversations with those people that can best help you. Now, some of the people that have got the best of intentions about helping you through these issues are not necessarily the right people to go to. So point number one is get an advocate. Find somebody that can work with you around what has happened to you and for you to vent what this experience is like. I've had many people express those feelings to me, to yell, to scream, not at me, but about the people that have actually removed the children. Now, it is best to do that with somebody else that actually isn't involved in the process in a sense than it is to do it at the department. I think it's also important to remember, and a lot of people have criticised me for saying this, but it's important to remember that many of the social workers that you will work with, if your children have been removed, are themselves pretty young. Many of them have just graduated from university. The turnover in child protection system is extremely high, and these are issues that the child protection system has, but they are often very young. And they don't know how to deal with conflict either. And they don't know how to mediate between what has happened for you, removing of your children, and their responsibility around the care of your kids. They have very few skill sets in that area. They also don't have much of a skill set when it comes to counselling, working with you, deciding on what needs to be done that's in the child's best interest but helps you to be a part of that process. They believe, and they keep saying this to me thousands and thousands of times over the decades, that they're acting in the child's best interest. Well, they're acting in the child's best interest if they believe that you're behaving in ways which are detrimental to the child. But if you don't believe that's the case, then the other question, the second point is, how do you convince them that this is not your experience, that you are not behaving, that the removal of a child was inappropriate, that whatever issues they think are there are either no longer there or you're dealing with them? So the best way to be able to deal with that, after you've dealt with the emotional stuff, done the advocacy stuff, talked to people, then the next step that you need to think about is what is it that they're saying about you that you find is either untrue or issues which perhaps need to be addressed. The parents who admit that there were issues, that may not mean that the child needed to be removed, and in many cases that isn't it. It isn't about removing a child. It is about finding ways to work with the parent to address the issues so the child can stay safe and in that home. That's the problem. The department step in at the slightest whim because they think that you're a shitty parent. So the best thing to do is to be able to, once you've dealt with the emotional side, is to find ways that you can work with them. Now, I need to tell you that that's not always possible. There'll be plenty of social workers out there who will just have this version of who you are. That's it. They're never going to change. But there are things that you can do to address that. Firstly, you don't have to accept that that is the only social worker that you can get. If you find someone that you can't work with, then you need to register complaints against that social worker so that you can find somebody whom you can. I've known of many instances where people have swapped social workers and suddenly found that they have a social worker that listens to them and they've had their kids returned as a result. Many occasions, though, sometimes you'll find that the swapping of the social workers, working with a really good social worker, I had a case not that long ago where they were working with a fabulous social worker, inspiring young woman who was only younger, straight out of university. It was her first job, but she was fantastic. And then she got moved on, and then they got a social worker who wasn't anywhere near as cooperative, as understanding as this other. So the age thing doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to find somebody because they're young who won't listen to you. The problem is that those people that are young, new into the system, are subject to the views and ideas and ideology of those people that sit above them. That is the problem. So I think that it's really important for us to understand that there is a process. Now, the other thing that we often that parents don't understand is simply what does this process look like? If I've had my child removed, how often can I meet them? What are those accesses like? What do I need to do to specifically address the issues? because the reality is the department will not tell you. They very rarely, they'll tell you what the problem is, but then they're not brokers. They don't broker services for people. They tell you perhaps on some occasions where you can go, but they don't give a crap about you. I used to have, many years ago, I had an issue with the fact that the department simply saw the kids as being their primary focus. And there was a time when I first started this business, or when I first started working with parents, was that the department were openly stating that they could not, that they weren't prepared to work with the parent because their focus was just the child. That was their focus, and it was wrong. In some instances, not all, some of those views have changed, where there are some social workers who will work with the parents in order to get the kids returned to them. It doesn't mean that it happens often enough, because it doesn't, but there are lots of people lots of social workers who will work with the parents, I know. I've got some. So Chloe says, unfortunately, child protection breaks numerous promises, and no matter what you do to satisfy the department, unfortunately, the children may not get reunited with parents. And that's true. I don't deny any of that. And Chaz says, what happens when they won't work with you and lie and falsify reports? How can anyone work with that? And that was the point, Chaz, that I was making earlier, that if a social worker won't work with you, then you need to request that you find another social worker who will. But you need to be clear about what it is that social worker is doing that is prohibiting them, or prohibiting that relationship that you need to have in order for you to work with the department. That's the issue. And that if you've got a social worker who won't work with you, what does that look like? Does it mean that they're not returning phone calls? Is it that they denigrate you and they put you down in meetings? They say things about you, perhaps to kids and to others, that you find unhelpful. They're not engaging with you in a meaningful way. The problem, I think, with a lot of these areas are that many parents, even though they would agree with a lot of what I just said, they find it really difficult to articulate that. And because they don't know the system, they don't know where to complain. So in South Australia here, we have a complaint session for DCP, and that there are processes that you can go through. You can certainly complain to the minister, you can complain to your local member, you can write emails to the director in the region, or you can write emails to the manager of the centre, where the social worker works. There's plenty of things that one can do in order to let them know, I guess, what your areas of concern are. The problem is that actually very few people do it. I did speak to someone recently and I did raise this issue. I was having this sort of conversation with them, and they were saying that that they had done all of those things. That even contacted the Ombudsman, Public Service Ombudsman, they contacted the NGO that was looking after their kids. They'd done everything, but nothing had happened. Now, none of what I say is how can I put it? None of what I say means that it will bring about the result that you need. I understand that. But what we want to do is have as many people complaining. So some years, a year or so ago, we at CPP set up a web page where people can go to and they can complain about a specific worker. If they want to, they can congratulate workers if they want to do that as well. So it's just an opportunity for people to talk about the experience they had with child protection workers. Now, we've had a lot of complaints, but the point about that was that we thought we would get an array, like hundreds and hundreds of people objecting about the workers that they're working with. Now, the reality is we had a few, but we had nowhere near as many as what we anticipated, given the groundswell that we thought was there in terms of the way workers were working. So we offered an opportunity for people to write down their complaints. We give them a list of things that they can maybe complain about, and they can add to that list if they want to. So we provided the best opportunity, but people haven't really used it in the way that we thought they would. We had one complaint from a worker in New South Wales, I think, and we then sent a letter to the minister complaining about this woman. So we just used the information that was provided for us from our webpage, and we sent that off to the minister. And the minister did acknowledge that they'd received that, or we don't know the outcome of that and probably never will. But you imagine this for a moment. If you have somebody that you're working with who is unhelpful, and that particular person has a number of other people that they're working with, that they're also working with, and they all register a complaint. And it would only take 3 or 4 complaints for someone to take any notice. Eventually, that the momentum behind that will build up, and that person hopefully would either be able to ask to leave or be asked to move on to somewhere else. So, but if you do not participate, and this is one of the biggest problems, it's okay for people to complain. I do it all the time. And I know it does your head in because you don't always get the response that you require. I have written literally hundreds and hundreds of complaints to the department around social workers, how clients were being treated and all that sort of stuff. But it's not always about the same social worker. It's about an event, a situation that I think is unjust and unfair, and we've endeavoured to have that rectified in some way. But if everybody does it, if you can imagine for a moment, if there were every one of you that worked with a social worker, you don't know who else that social worker is working with, you don't know what other kids are in their care or whatever, but that's irrelevant. If everybody complained, and that is your right to complain about services that you receive that are unhelpful, it would make an incredible difference to how that particular social worker, if a social worker knew that your complaint was being heard. One of the things about complaining to a minister is that a minister has to seek a response from the person that's being complained about. So, and they hate it because they don't like being responsible to anybody really. So if they believe that they're made responsible to the minister, then hopefully that may correct some of those behaviours that have been highlighted in the complaint. But if you don't complain, if you just want to bitch about it on the side, complain to all your friends, complain to me, complain to whoever it might be, your advocate, but you're not complaining direct about the services that you're not getting and the way you're being treated, then that's no one else's fault but yours. Because if you all do it, then you might bring about specific changes. So I'll just go through some of the messages. Glad to see so many. Kate, good to see there. Unfortunately, child protection should understand trauma and apply that tool that they work with. Sadly, they don't and don't have the skills, as you just said. Right, she was typing as I said that. They don't. It's one of my big issues about, as a social worker, one of my biggest issues is the lack of skill set that people have. Because I know, now I left social work nearly 30 years ago. Now when I left, I had some skills because I did some work there around counselling through Lifeline. I did some courses and other stuff before I finished my degree. So I did leave with some skill set. But I know so many people, so many young people, not necessarily young, but when you leave social work, your skill set is virtually zero. And that it takes some years to be able to develop a skill set that fits with the type of clients that you're working with. Now, you imagine a social worker, and I do feel for them, believe me, that if a social worker leaves and they don't know what it is that they're doing, they don't know how to interact with people, they don't know how to counsel, mediate, deal with conflict, they don't have a whole host of they don't know how to work therapeutic with people, they don't know about trauma, as Chloe was saying, they don't understand any of that stuff, then it's sad for them because they get burnt out and they leave and they say, well, this is it for me, I don't want to ever go there again. Or they can actually learn those skills. The department doesn't teach them those skills. That's the problem. The department ignores all of those really important skills and wants to teach them just about how to respond around kids. They do some trauma stuff, they tell me. I don't get to see the benefits of any of that. They have all these other programs they put in place, but none of them are about developing a skill base. So, and sometimes, to be fair, skills come via practice. So you have to practice the skills that are required in order to be successful. Anyone that worked well was quickly moved on. Yep, and that's the other issue too. There was, the Chloe Valentine case. It was interesting to note that the people that were responsible basically for her death, they got promoted within the department. I don't know, I think one person got fired, but apart from that, very little happened for those people. Because, if the department is going to fail to make these people accountable, then the only people that can make them accountable are you and I. And so we need to make sure that they're accountable. Kate, can I put them into a written post? I could put them on our web page. Maybe I could write something up around that. And that's another interesting, Kate. Sometimes parents are just too tired. The emotional drain of losing a child is unbelievable. It's exhausting. And that's why I think, and there seems to be it's a roller coaster ride, because a lot of parents who have their kids removed will find that within 2 or 3 days they're before the court. They don't know what the idea, they don't even know, a lot of them didn't even know the youth court or the children's court existed. And suddenly they find themselves placed before the court, never been to court before, don't understand anything about the system, let alone the child protection system, and they haven't got a lawyer because, and that's the other issue which I'll talk about in just a moment, they don't understand what the system means, they don't understand what the legislation is, obviously, and so they don't understand that this at the end of the day is like an assessment period of what's been happening. And then the social workers, though, will tell you that there's a good chance that maybe you'll have your children returned to you at the end of this period, which is not the case. And so along the way also, you're given false hope. So a lot of parents have told me that they've been told that it's just a 3-month period and then they'll have their kids returned to them. And it's a bit like the one that I think I talked about last week was that if you go to a GOM18 order, they'll say, well, you can go back and have the order revoked. Yes, according to legislation, you can go back and have the order revoked, but it's unlikely that you'll get funding for it, that the department will return your kids when they're on a long-term order to 18. County of Victoria complaints request. I was going to talk about lawyers. So that's the other thing. So when you go to if there's a short-term order of 3 to 6 months, normally legal aid would not provide funding for that, primarily because the information that the department has will often be extreme and sometimes untruthful, but nevertheless, they will have a stack of information which, once presented to legal aid will say, well, we can't fund that because there's not much chance of you winning. And so it's unlikely to have legal representation, so you find yourself in court by yourself. But then it's important to be able to remember that you need to have someone who does at least have an understanding of the system, not necessarily a lawyer, but certainly someone who has understanding of the system, who can advise you as to what the process is like and what the outcome by going to court is potentially going to be. So, and if you've got funding, fine. Then get a lawyer. By all means, fight it as best as you can. But if you haven't got the funding, don't worry about it. It's unlikely that you're going to, on a short-term order, get what you want. Chloe says, made numerous complaints and no luck. Thanks for advice for an advocate. And sometimes, Chloe, when we make a complaint, and I don't know how you make those complaints and the type of language you use, but it's really helpful to get some sort of professional help around the complaint. I've seen complaints that are long, rambly, and I'm not suggesting this is the case with you at all, but sometimes those complaints are long, rambly, and incoherent. And someone just looks at them and says, well, I don't understand what this person is really talking about. And it's best, and remembering that the person that you're complaining to has probably many other things that they need to do, including other complaints. So unless it's in dot point form, specific, talks about behaviour, specific behaviour, and this is one thing that people seem to ignore. So they talk about not what someone has specifically done, but how that has impacted them. So, for example, when people write complaints, they don't talk about what someone did to put them down. They'll say they were put down. So they don't talk about the language they used to put them down. They don't talk about what language or what was done specifically that denigrated them. People generally don't talk about and identify people's behaviours. And then following from that, they don't talk about how that made them feel as a result of that behaviour. And to learn those skills, you really need someone that's going to sit alongside you and help you out as well. So find someone that can work with you and someone that can talk about it. I've even known quite articulate people to put together stuff, but because it's so emotive and they're so invested in it, there's lots of stuff they miss out. It becomes a bit rambly, sometimes incoherent. And it sometimes needs someone else to look at all of that stuff and say, well, I know that when I've had conflictual incidences where I've been very emotional, I find somebody else who can sit aside from that, read what I've written, and then change it so that it makes a little bit more sense and can look at it impartially. So, Chloe, you're very active. Di Ridley, good to see you. I tried to go for care for my grandson, though I have historically involvement. Everything is rectified. I tried to get joinery to proceedings. The secretary said that I get assessed for respite. I accepted, then I was dismissed. And I think it's sad when people are given a set of information about something, and then told that they're not successful. There are so many potential kinship carers out there who, and that's the other thing. The department looks for the most expedient way by which they can get a kid into care. They don't necessarily care too much about who that child is with, providing it's out of their hands and it's dealt with. I know that, a long time ago, many years ago, I did my first social work placement in the child protection system with Family and Youth Services, as it was then. And I know that on a Friday night, you'd get kids sent to you or brought into you, and they were really busting a gut to get these kids. It was like a production line for some reason, and they hated it. Many workers were not there on a Friday night because they didn't want to have to deal with kids, because it would mean they'd be there all night. They'd have to worry about them on the weekend and that sort of stuff. So you'd avoid it. And so for a worker to find a placement for a child is in itself difficult, because there are so few out there. And so they wind up then putting kids into placements where they should not be put. I heard of a child the other day being placed in a family where there were 13 other kids. 13 children in that placement. What attention was this kid had just been removed, was traumatised by all of that. You can imagine the distress this child must have been under, and then placed in a household with 13 kids. So it was a foster parent with 13 kids, or 11 kids. Either way, a lot of kids. So, and that's because the department just, if someone puts up their hand and says, yeah, I'll take a kid, rather than hunting around, they'll push that kid out there. And they'll even prefer to do that than contacting your parents, your uncles, your aunties, your siblings, because then they have to check them out to make sure that they qualify. And so they will ignore you, or they'll ignore that option. They do that around Indigenous kids all the time. That's why we have so many Indigenous kids in non-Indigenous households, because the department cannot be bothered to find a person that that child can stay with while an assessment is being made. And it's woeful. It's an embarrassment, because what it means at the end of the day is that they're not able to do their job. Any more comments here? Now, before I go, I just want to mention that on Wednesday night, we have a group. I can't tell you, I haven't got my paper with me at the moment. You can find out what the group is talking about if you go to our Facebook page. But we have this group which is fabulous. A group of people such as yourself will come along and we'll talk about a specific topic. It was supposed to be, what sort of conversations do we need to have? And that's the sort of stuff I'm talking about today. So if you can, Wednesday night, 7:30 South Australian time, daylight saving throws all of that out, so I don't know what that is elsewhere. 7 o'clock in some states, 8 o'clock in others. But go to our Facebook page and have a look. Avery at around 7 o'clock our time will put up the link, and you can join us by just clicking on that link on MS Teams and join in the discussion. The feedback that we've had is that a lot of people have really enjoyed hearing other people's stories. Now, we don't have the solutions necessarily to every individual problem, but by sharing your issues and sharing your story, you may find someone in that group who may also have a similar story to your own, and that one which hopefully will make a difference to you. Now, also, I would just like to say that if you can join the Child Protection Party, get involved with us so that you can help us make a difference. I was saying before that there are so many people who say, what CPP does is good. I can understand that you want to raise awareness around all of these issues around kids, not just child protection, but all areas that relate to children, and you need to have people in Parliament to represent kids. That's what we're about. But there's no point it means nothing to us to be patted on the back for setting up an organisation like this, and for all of us who are volunteers to spend the time doing what we do. We do it because we care about providing better outcomes for all children. And the point that I keep making about this is that kids are voiceless in our community, and we as adults need to stand up for them. But we also need to understand the issues that they're facing, not just parents who've had their kids removed, right? That affects kids, obviously, because that in itself is traumatic for them, and they go into long-term care, and all the outcomes for those kids are usually pretty crappy. So we understand that system needs to be corrected, but there's a whole host of other areas, whether it be youth suicide, whether it be kids with disabilities, whether it be kids with learning disabilities, education system in itself needs to be improved. So there's a range of issues that need to be addressed, and we at CPP are trying to address them. But in order to do so, for us to be successful, we need you to contribute to us. And by doing that, you can become a member. $12 a year, it's bugger all. Become a member of CPP, and that would be your first contribution. And then you can find ways to become involved in our committees. No matter what state you're in, we have a committee set up, so you'll be able to join that branch and become a part of real change when it comes to producing better outcomes for kids. So thanks everybody for being with me. In South Australia, I think some other states, it's a public holiday tomorrow, so everybody enjoy that. Take care, look after yourself, and more importantly, be safe.